Hello everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and in today's video we'll continue our series of political philosophy for political science in the CSS exams. And our today's topic is Aristotle's political thought. And just like Plato, Aristotle is a very prominent figure of ancient Greek philosophy who played a very important part in founding the fundamental ideas of political science. And in the same way, when we talk about the CSS exam, we see that Aristotle has been a very important philosopher, as the examiner often asks questions related to his political philosophy. Some of the most prominent aspects of Aristotle's political philosophy revolve around his comparison or his kind of congruence that he builds between the state and the human nature. He kind of advocates the idea that man is by nature a political animal. He propagates the fact that politics is something that is within humans. So he sees politics as a very important instrument of a person's life. At the same time, just like Plato, he promotes the idea of virtues, morality, good manners, justice, and all those wonderful egalitarian ideas. And another very important aspect of Aristotle's political philosophy is that he presents the classification of governments. So Plato did not do this. Plato just simply explained his political philosophy through that of the philosopher king, but Aristotle tried to approach political science in a more rational way, and he tried to explain the different kinds of government systems or political systems through the classification of governments, which we'll be studying in detail in our video. And when we talk about who was Aristotle, so it is very important to understand that just like Plato and Socrates, Aristotle was a Greek philosopher and he was the student of Plato. And of course, Aristotle had a huge influence of Western political thought. So when we say he had a huge influence of Western political thought, it means that he was associated with the schools of thought of Socrates and Plato. He kind of he had seen the growth of democracy. He had seen the idea of opposition through the presence of sophists, and he did understand the link between individuality, collectivism, governance, administration, the kind of individual interests that needed to be entertained in the state. He understood the dynamics of national interest. He understood how the classification of society happened at that time. So he was well aware of how the society was basically functioning. So this is what is meant by Western political thought. There was a lot of debate about religion, yet rationality and freedom of expression was given a lot of importance. So just like Plato had most of his work written in his book Republic, Aristotle had written most of his work in his book Politics, which again focused more on the idea of the purpose of state and the idea of good life. And he also analyzed the importance of virtues, ethics, and rationality in political life. So when we talk about Aristotle, Aristotle is seen as the father of political science, and there is a reason for it. And it is because he approached the subject with a very empirical and systematic perspective, and he tried to study the reasoning behind the existence of the state and why individuals should be the way they should be, or the way he tells them to be. He kind of promotes the idea of citizenship for the first time. And even though Plato also talked about it, but Plato was very idealistic in his approach. Aristotle, on the other hand, actually looked at political science as a subject, as a science, as a discipline that needed to be understood. So moving forward, it is very important to discuss the major points of Aristotle's political philosophy. He talked about quite a few things, and I'll be shedding light over his different ideas so that you might have a very clear and brief idea of his political philosophy, so that when any question comes around any of these aspects, you are able to attempt it in a very comprehensive manner. Because we have seen that in 2024 exams, the subject of political science has been considered a hit, which means that it hasn't been marked very proficiently or very generously, even though not many of the students are failing in the subject, but still what what is required by the students is to approach the questions in a more comprehensive and elaborative manner, and to make the exam more engaging. And I'll soon be sharing my mock exams as well. But before that, we'll be discussing Aristotle's political philosophy. So yes, he talked about animated versus the unanimated property. So the animated property is about, it included slaves. And it was at that time considered very important for household labor and daily function. And the unanimated property is something which is still functional, which includes tools, lands, material possessions. And back in the days, this was considered very important for the economic and political hierarchy that was presented by Aristotle in his political philosophy. And it is also important to know that back in the days, slave economy was very common because Greece was an agricultural land, and the people themselves were very much indulged into, political reasoning, philosophy, thinking, rationality, and all those wonderful things. And they themselves did not indulge in, the acts of strict and strenuous labor. So for that purpose, they used to have slaves who used to carry out all these things. And that is why he kind of justifies slavery as well. And this kind of reflected the household economy, which was the base of society back in Athens, back in Greece, I mean. And even though this concept is very outdated, but it played a very important role in forming the idea of how Plato looked at property. For him, property was important. And of course, that is why he divided it into two different categories. So for him, property was not only land. For him, property was also about having ownership over certain people. His idea of slavery will be discussed soon. So his second point is that he believed that the state is natural. So he believed that the state exists by nature, and humans are naturally inclined to live in a political community. It is one of his famous sayings that he who lives without the state is either a beast or a god. So he believed that, he could not comprehend the fact that a person lived without his association with any kind of state. So if a person exists, it means that he has some kind of association with the state. So, both were kind of connected with each other. He did not see individual as a separate being. He only saw an individual being in connection to a state. And to him, the city-state is the highest form of association. The city-state, or you can say the political system of a region, it is something that he believes helps the citizens live a virtuous and complete life. And he saw state as a natural extension of human development. For example, he believed that there was an individual. From an individual, this cycle developed into a family, from a family into a village, from a village into a state. And he believed that state is the culmination of human associations. He believed that humans reach full potential only in a political community. Without the state, a man is not good enough. So, he believed that state is necessary for ethical and rational life. So as we discussed about animated and unanimated property, we'll be discussing about the importance that he gives to private property. Now, Aristotle strongly supported the idea of private property, unlike Plato, and he believed that people take care more of what they own, and it encourages responsibility. When you own something, you are more responsible towards your ownership and towards the things that are under your control, and hence this helps you become a better citizen. This is what Aristotle believed in. And he also emphasized moral use of property. He believed that, the wealth should serve virtue, not greed. This is a very important point, which kind of highlights his aspect of economic morality as well. And he believed that, the idea of shared property or the communism of property was very wrong. Even though he was Plato's student, he completely disregarded this concept of his teacher. And he believed that, private ownership leads to responsibility and care, and property should be used with a sense of community. He did give much importance to communal strength through economy and wealth, but he did not believe in communal ownership. So he believed that people should help others while still owning things individually. Balance between personal rights and social duties is the key when you talk about the aspect of private property in Aristotle's political philosophy. So this is a very important concept. And then, of course, we also talked about slavery. So Aristotle's idea of women and slavery are considered very controversial, because he perceived slavery as a natural institution. He believed that some people are naturally slaves, some people are born to obey. So if you look at Aristotle's political philosophy, you see that he also said that state is natural, like an individual is nothing without the state. At the same time, when you look at his concept of women and slavery, you see that he adds a very natural or organic aspect to it. He kind of promotes the idea that by nature some things are inferior, by nature some things are meant to be the way they are. So, even though this idea is highly criticized, but it was a reflection of the Greek socio-political context. And regarding women, Aristotle believed that they lack rationality and are inferior to men in terms of political and moral responsibility. And this again reflects the patriarchal lens of the time, and it's important to present it critically in your CSS answers. And when you talk about Plato, even though he kind of promoted the idea of gender equality in political leadership and economic and educational opportunities, but he kind of does not clearly talk about the role of women in leadership position, because he's only talking about philosopher king. He's not talking about a philosopher queen. And at the same time, when you talk about communism of families, his concept in itself disregards and discards the respect of women. And at the same time, we see that Aristotle believed in natural hierarchies. When he's talking about slavery and the role of women, he kind of creates a natural hierarchy, which is of course very controversial today. And he kind of justified slavery and the inferior position of women that way. But we need to approach his political philosophy with respect to his, constraints of time and rational, what can we say, rational challenges that were existing at that time, and how they were not so open to many ideas. So Aristotle, just like his teacher, emphasized on the importance of education, and he believed that education was very important for the success and development of any society. And he believed that state must educate citizens to achieve virtue, not just to make laws or to teach them laws, but the state should educate citizens to build their moral character. So this is what makes citizenship a duty, not just a status. And when you talk about education in Aristotle's political philosophy, he kind of links it with being good citizens. He highlights the idea of citizenship. Even through his idea of owning property through private ownership, he highlights the importance of being good citizens, being responsible and, initiative-taking citizens. At the same time, when he's talking about education, his purpose of, spreading education or to, make it available to everyone and anyone is to enhance their civic training, to infuse moral education, and to, increase the role of state in shaping values. So he believed that, the state he did focus on the idea of constitution. So he believed that a good constitution depends on virtuous individuals. And if there are laws, if there is a constitution, but if they are not good citizens who will obey them or who will, know their value, there is no then there's no importance of such laws. And he did not believe in the power of stick. He believed in the power of words, in the power of making people believe within themselves. The thing that we say that people should have an internal or an innate emotional attachment to the things surrounding them. So this is what Aristotle wanted. He wanted the individuals to have an innate emotional responsibility towards the state, so that, the constitution is realized to its full potential. Unlike Plato, Aristotle actually did present a constitution. He did, like when I say he did present a constitution, it means that it was just a simple in terms of all these things that we are discussing. It just comprised of all these things. But he was someone who actually knew what constitution was. He did not believe that any person who comes into the power should use his wisdom and whims to make laws. So education was something that would guide everyone towards the right path and would help citizens cultivate reason and virtue and to achieve the goals of life. So in the same way, he believed that, man is a political animal also. He believed, like, this is a very famous quote that is associated with Aristotle. And as he said that man by nature is a political animal, humans, naturally have this instinct to live in communities. They have this instinct to, first live in families, then in villages, towns, and then as a state. And this highest form of association is something which is the internal or innate need of humans. And by living in society, humans, try to communicate their needs by speaking, by learning how to reason, by distinguishing right from wrong. This not only helps in building communal strength but also kind of shapes their individual identity. And this is how, political life is essential for human flourishing. So this is how he justifies man being a political animal as well. And this is a very important aspect of Aristotle's political philosophy. And then now we'll discuss the most important aspect of Aristotle's political philosophy, which is his classification of governments. So this classification given by Aristotle in the later years played a very important role in, basically defining the separation of powers that was to be determined by Montesquieu. But Aristotle kind of laid the foundation for it instead of just giving an idea of anybody coming into power and being despotic, authoritative, and ruling the people was something that he did not believe in. Since he was a person who had read a lot and he knew the kind of dynamics that existed in the political system, he presented different scenarios and he kind of, classified the governments by who rules and in whose interest they rule, basically. So basically, he presented a table of, classification of governments, which was determined by three factors: the number of rulers, and he divided them into their good form and their corrupt form. So good form and corrupt form is basically on the basis of in whose favor they work. Right. So in some forms of government work in favor of the citizens, as it should be, but some forms of government work in the favor of the elite or in the favor of a narrow population, which eventually turns out to be negative in Aristotle's political philosophy, because for him, the purpose of government is to enhance equality, is to enhance individual grooming, individual strength, individual skills. And if any kind of government comes into power which does not uphold these values, then it definitely is a corrupt form of government, right? So on the basis of number of rulers, he says that any kind of government that is ruled by one person, but it is in the interest of everyone, then it is a monarchy. Because in monarchy still you have certain rules and you are bounded by, royal regulations. Or somehow he kind of says that monarchy is still something that comes with a lot of legitimacy. And then he says that if there is just there's just one person who's ruling and he uses powers of authoritarianism and despotism to, kind of obey, but to kind of, make people obey the rules, then it is tyranny. So tyranny is something which, he was against, and he said that, if a person is not working for the favor of people, if the purpose of education is indoctrination and not enlightenment, then that is tyranny. At the same time, if he says that if a few number of people are in government and they are, they are ruling for the purpose of, engaging or flourishing good a political, college, they are creating political awareness, and that is aristocracy. So aristocracy is basically a form of government that is by a few number of people who are very rich, and it could also be by people who are, it's like a narrow elite that could be rich, that has a lot of access to resources, that is educated, but it needs to, kind of cultivate a positive environment according to Aristotle's definition. And then he says that oligarchy is same as aristocracy, but oligarchy is something that has very negative sense associated to it. Oligarchy is something that is focused on, exploitation of citizens around them. And then when there are a lot of people in government, then he calls it polity. So polity is something that focuses on all the wonderful ideas of Aristotle that we have discussed. And he says democracy is the worst form of government. Democracy is the worst form of government because here, the majority is going to rule. And when majority is going to rule, everyone is going to have an opinion. In polity, he says that in polity, not everybody has an opinion, because only if you have the right of citizenship, which means if you're educated, if you have property, if you are participating in the affairs of the state on daily basis, then you are going to be a part of the polity. Then you are going to be a part of the governance system and all that stuff. But in democracy, everyone is going to have an opinion. Either you have property, you do not have property. Either you have education, you don't have education. That does not make any sense. You're just going to have equal rights, and all those ideas are going to be applicable on you as well. So he says that in that sense, democracy is not good, because then everyone's going to have an opinion, and that is something that could be detrimental. And why he says this is because he had seen this during, I'm not sure if, Aristotle was present at the time when Socrates went through a very difficult time in his life when he drank the hemlock. I'm not really sure about that, but of course he was well aware of the Western political trends. He knew what had happened. So that is why, just like Plato, Aristotle had a kind of aversion towards democracy. But of course, Plato was very um, extreme in his thoughts that he just gave entire power to the philosopher king. Aristotle is still quite balanced in his approach, which shows how rational and how learned he was. That he kind of said that democracy is wrong, but yes, polity, which means a more refined form of democracy, could work for people. So, on the basis of all these ideas presented by Aristotle, he is called as the father of political science, and he called politics the master science because he believed that it directs all the other aspects of human life. For him, the politics of state was very important as it provided a framework for ethics, economics, military, and education. And he believed that every discipline serves the broader aim of creating a good state. Just like a captain steers a ship, politics guides human society. And he believed that no other field has such a wide impact on human life. And that is why, he believed that the purpose of the state is leading a good life, helping the individuals lead a good life. So, the state was just not for survival, it was for the good life of individuals. Unlike Plato, who stressed idealism, Aristotle was more practical, and he believed that the state should help citizens develop virtue and moral character. Its role is to create conditions where people can reach their full potential, and politics is, not just about law. It was also about ethics. It was more about formation of an individual. Plato, he kind of divided his society in different classes, and at the same way the system of education was also divided, and at the same way we see the property, the kind of idea of family was also divided. But Aristotle did not do that. He kind of presented a very rational framework of how citizenship can be achieved through struggle, and he justifies many of his controversial ideas by claiming them to be natural in nature. And just like every other philosopher, Aristotle also received a lot of criticism for his political philosophy, and we'll be discussing it. So, when we talk about Aristotle's political philosophy, the first criticism that is levied upon him is that he believed that everything in nature is designed for a purpose. He believed that everything had a final cause. So, basically, the word purpose in Aristotle's political philosophy is known as final cause. It is also known as teleology. For example, we say that a seed wants to become a tree, or humans exist to live a virtuous life, right? So Aristotle believed that the purpose of humans is to lead a virtuous life. The purpose of state is to nourish and flourish a human body or human mind and soul and all such things, right? But the criticism upon this is that this attaches human-like intention to nature. It anthropomorphizes nature, which means that nature, which lacks human-like emotions, logic, and rationality, is kind of is kind of attached with the idea that it also has a purpose. Like your property has a purpose, your acts of governance have a purpose. So attaching purpose to non-human like entities is wrong. So this is a kind of criticism that is given to his political philosophy, which fails to kind of distinguish between humans and other non-living things around humans. So because modern science, or in modern times, we'll be studying about why things are happening, why they should not be happening. It's more about why and should it happen or should it not happen. It's not like it is meant to be this way or everything has a purpose. It kind of makes the entire it shifts the attention from the basic purpose of a thing to what naturally it is designed to be. Like Aristotle kind of associates the fact that everything is designed naturally to be this way, to be a certain way. For example, women are designed to be this way. Slaves are designed to be this way because they are mentally inferior and physically stronger. So, this kind of generalizes things. And then, of course, he had a very static view of the world. He was too rigid in his classification of gender, you can say gender classification or classification in terms of slaves and masters and all such things. He did not explain if slaves could ever become masters, even though he does talk about it, but it is very rigid. He does not tell how it will happen, why it will happen. He just focused on the fact that they are meant to be like that, which is not very viable. And then he also, of course, justifies inequality He said slavery is natural, women are less rational than men. So these ideas are unethical and reflect the biases of his time. And modern values promote equality and human rights, and all these concepts are perceived as deeply flawed. And he also had some empirical limitations, which means like he was considered as the father of political science. He was considered as someone who tried to embrace rationality in politics. And of course, he also read 158 constitutions at his time. But what he did was that he observed, he understood, and he just presented his theory. He did not apply it anywhere. And we know that in modern day, science without application is considered null and void. It's just words. So these are of course empirical limitations that he had. And then of course he had over reliance on logic, which means that he made all things about being virtuous and being good, which is like oversimplifying things. So his logic was basically very simple for complex modern issues. We can say that yes, virtue ethics is based on a narrow ideal of the good life. So you can say that good life is about virtue and ethics, but it cannot be for everyone. You cannot generalize it, right? Not everybody can be virtuous. Not everyone can be ethical in their life. Like he does not address the odds. For him, the purpose of state is individual development. For him, the purpose of an individual is to run a state, because state is of course the highest form of association. But these are two simple issues. He does not delve deep into the complications that could arise in modern day or even in political scenario at that time, in terms of the economic miscalculations, in terms of administrative drawbacks, in terms of what kind of system of education should be there. If everything is about the state and everything is about humans being virtuous, it kind of diverges from the modern political thought, because modern political thought is very complicated, and modern political thought completely separates morality from the political apparatus of any state. And of course he talks about ethical elitism. So ethical elitism means that his virtue is about his idea of being ethical is focused on was based on rich educated Greek men with leisure time. So if you read Aristotle's political thought, he says that you are only considered a citizen if you have property, if you are engaged in the affairs of the state and do all such things. Now just imagine a person who is a peasant. He has to go to the farms, he has to plow the land, he has to sow the seeds, he has to do the harvest and everything. Do you think that such a person has time to come into those public meetings and tell about what or how the state should work or govern? Of course not. So his political theory is about ethical elitism, which kind of promoted the idea or advocated for the power of elite men back in those days. And even if you look at his classification of government, he talks about aristocrats, he talks about polity. In polity also he's talking about ethical elitism. Those who have property, those who have education should only vote, should talk about the political affairs, should sit in political circles, should give their opinions and all such stuff. And he considers democracy very wrong, because he believes that if you do not have property, how can you have an opinion? You do not have an opinion in how the state should govern. And it doesn't fit in today's diverse and democratic and working societies, because even in today's world, if we see, if there are millions of people living in any territory, and more than 80% of those people are belong to the salaried class, they cannot come and sit in those weekly political circles and give their opinions about this and that. We no longer live in a very represented democracy. We live in such a democracy where we choose people for ourselves to speak in parliaments and in assemblies. So, but when you look at Aristotle's political philosophy, he believes that you own property, you have complete liberty to come and sit and make laws for your own self, which highlights how much knowingly unknowingly he promoted the idea of ethical elitism. So yes, these are some of the ideas which he talked about. And if you have some more questions or some more some more opinions about his political philosophy, criticism upon it, or just a brief discussion, we could have that in the comment section. And let me know your reviews in the comments. Thank you.